More than 1,000 stone circles stand across the world, silent, weathered, and forgotten. For centuries, people believed they were isolated rituals of ancient tribes. But recent discoveries reveal something far more unsettling. These structures share the same alignments, the same geometry, and the same impossible precision. The oldest among them, Karahan Tepe, was built over 11,400 years ago, thousands of years before writing, metal tools, or the civilizations we usually credit with intelligence. Yet its design follows the same pattern found in Scotland, Ireland, Germany, Sweden, Egypt, and even the deep Sahara. If the dating is correct, then these stones are not local monuments at all. They are fragments of a global blueprint created by a civilization that existed long before recorded history. A civilization wiped out at the end of the Ice Age, leaving only stone behind as their enduring message. The shock began when researchers noticed a consistent pattern in the alignments. Circles separated by thousands of kilometers all pointed toward solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills, and specific star risings. Their accuracy was extraordinary, deviations of less than a single degree, despite being built in an age without compasses, metal tools, or written instructions. Attempts to replicate this precision with Stone Age methods repeatedly failed. Simple sighting poles could not maintain alignment. Ropes frayed. Wooden markers drifted over time. Yet ancient builders achieved results that defy the expected capabilities of nomadic hunter-gatherers. As more sites were analyzed, the mystery deepened. Many structures once believed to date from 3000 BCE were found to be far older. 5000 BCE, 7000 BCE, even older in some cases. Refined carbon dating at Karahan Tepe and nearby sites pushed the timeline back to around 9400 BCE. This placed the origins of the world's earliest stone circles during a period of catastrophic climate shifts. The Younger Dryas had just ended. Ice sheets collapsed, sea levels surged, populations migrated inland. If a sophisticated culture had existed before the floods, its survivors may have carried fragments of their astronomical knowledge with them, rebuilding it in safer highlands. Evidence of this shared knowledge appears everywhere. Repeated geometric ratios, circular enclosures divided into consistent segments, passageways oriented toward the first light of winter, stones arranged in predictable patterns echoing constellations visible in the late Pleistocene sky. These similarities are too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. They imply that different groups across continents were using the same mental blueprint, even though mainstream archaeology insists they had no contact with each other. The question becomes unavoidable. How did people separated by thousands of kilometers share the same ideas? There is no known trade network linking Scotland to Turkey in 9000 BCE. No evidence of ships capable of long voyages. No record of a written system capable of transmitting detailed instructions. Yet the alignments themselves show a level of global synchronicity that suggests widespread communication, or at least a shared origin of knowledge that predates their dispersal. New technologies have only intensified the mystery. LiDAR scans reveal hidden geometric patterns beneath soil long untouched. Ground-penetrating radar shows circular foundations buried under later layers of land. Adjustments for Earth's axial precession reveal that many monuments originally aligned with celestial events visible between 9000 and 10,500 BCE. When restored to their original astronomical context, the world's stone circles appear less like isolated constructions and more like nodes in a prehistoric network, each one designed to capture the same knowledge through light, shadow, and the movement of the heavens. A few researchers now propose a radical idea, that this network functioned as a kind of prehistoric communication system, not electronic, but celestial, a method of maintaining shared calendars, tracking seasonal cycles, or marking long-term astronomical events. A Stone Age internet, using the sky as its medium. If this theory is correct, then these ancient builders were not primitive at all. They were the last inheritors of a civilization that we have forgotten, one capable of understanding the cosmos with a depth we are only now beginning to rediscover. If the stones truly carry echoes of a lost world, then the real mystery is not how they were built, but who taught the builders, and what happened to the civilization that once connected them all. If the stone circles were fragments of a shared system, then the next question is just as important as the alignments themselves. How did such knowledge survive long enough to appear in multiple regions? The consistency suggests a level of memory, teaching, or cultural transmission that archaeologists struggle to explain. Most hunter-gatherer groups leave behind simple shelters, small ritual sites, or temporary hearths. They do not leave behind megalithic observatories requiring coordinated labor, specialized skills, and long-term planning. Yet the builders of these circles clearly did. They did more than survive their environment. They observed it, measured it, recorded it, and carved its meaning into the landscape. Many myths from early cultures speak of a time before the flood, when knowledge was handed down by the first ones, the sky watchers, or the people who knew the heavens. These stories, found from Mesopotamia to the Celtic world, often describe a group of survivors who arrived after a catastrophe and rebuilt fragments of what was lost. At first, archaeologists treated these legends as symbolic, but the more ancient structures are uncovered, the more the myths begin to resemble memories, distant echoes of people who carried knowledge through the chaos of a collapsing world. Karahan Tepe's age places it right at the edge of the Younger Dryas boundary. Around this time, dramatic climate upheavals reshaped human settlements. Ice sheets melted, coastlines drowned, and traditional migration routes disappeared. Populations scattered, and new groups emerged in landscapes that were still raw and unstable. In this context, knowledge of the sky would have been far more than spiritual. It would have been essential. Tracking seasons could mean predicting animal migrations, rainfall cycles, and the return of plant life. Understanding solstices wasn't ceremonial, it was survival. But the precision found in these sites goes beyond practical needs. Alignments to lunar standstills, rare celestial events occurring every 18.6 years, appear in places where the builders supposedly lived short, difficult lives. It raises the question, who invests this level of long-term observation into structures unless they are preserving something bigger? Many researchers argue that these circles functioned as timekeepers, marking not just seasons but cycles spanning generations. If true, it implies an organizational structure far more sophisticated than archaeologists currently accept for the late Pleistocene. The geometry deepens the mystery. Across distant sites, circles often divide into identical ratios. Passageways are oriented to sunrise angles that match each other across continents. Even the spacing of stones follows patterns repeating from Turkey to Britain. It is as if the builders shared an inner blueprint, a mental architecture taught and remembered across thousands of kilometers. This cannot be dismissed as random parallel development. The margins of error are too small, the similarities too embedded. Attempts to explain the connections through migration face another obstacle, the chronological gap. Egypt's Nabta Playa aligns with the summer solstice around 6000 BCE. Gössek Circle in Germany shows solar alignments around 4900 BCE. Newgrange in Ireland channels winter solstice light around 3200 BCE. Meanwhile, the oldest sites in Anatolia date to 9500 BCE. The pattern resembles not a linear spread, but scattered branches of an older root, knowledge resurfacing in different regions long after its origin. This possibility challenges the traditional timeline of human development. Mainstream history teaches that complex architecture, mathematics, and astronomy emerged only after agriculture. But the stones contradict that expectation. They show that advanced thinking existed before farming, before settlements, before the rise of cities. If those builders possessed such understanding, then their cultural memory had to come from even earlier generations. They did not invent everything at once. They inherited a worldview, refined it, and rebuilt it in stone. Some researchers propose that a pre-agricultural knowledge tradition once spanned several regions, perhaps transmitted through seasonal gatherings or long-distance cultural exchanges we have not yet discovered. Others suspect that the earliest stone circles were relics of a lost culture that survived the cataclysmic transition at the end of the Ice Age. Either explanation suggests that our picture of human prehistory is incomplete. The official timeline contains a gap, a period when something important happened, something capable of reshaping multiple societies, yet almost no written memory survives. What remains is the stone. And stone does not lie. Its alignments point to a mind at work, a deliberate understanding of the heavens, a sense of continuity. Whether the builders were preserving sacred knowledge, mapping the sky for survival, or maintaining connections across vast distances, the outcome is the same. These circles were not random. They were intentional. They were meaningful. And they were built by people whose capabilities have been underestimated for far too long. If Chapter 1 reveals anything, it is that these structures hint at a deeper story, one the Earth has buried, and one archaeology is only beginning to rediscover. But the stones are not the only clues. As researchers expanded their investigations, they uncovered artifacts, carvings, and construction techniques that raise even more profound questions. To understand who built this network, we must look beyond the alignments and into the physical evidence itself, evidence that challenges every assumption about early humanity. To understand the civilization behind the stone circles, the story must turn toward the physical evidence buried beneath the soil. Alignments alone do not prove a shared culture, but the stones themselves, how they were carved, shaped, transported, and arranged, begin to reveal a much more unsettling picture. 3 sites in particular expose the depth of the mystery: Karahan Tepe in Turkey, Nabta Playa in Egypt, and the Göcek Circle in Germany. Individually, each site is impressive. Together, they form a pattern so improbable that it forces a reconsideration of everything we thought we knew about early human capability. Karahan Tepe stands at the center of this mystery. Older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, it belongs to a period when humans were expected to be simple hunter-gatherers. Yet its architecture suggests a mastery of engineering, stonework, and astronomy that rivals much later civilizations. The T-shaped pillars are smooth, precisely carved, and set into foundations that required planning and coordinated labor. Many weigh several tons, yet they were placed with intention, forming enclosures whose orientations align with celestial events from the Pleistocene sky. Even more remarkable is the absence of metal tools. Archaeologists found only stone blades, bone tools, and basic hammerstones, none of which could easily shape the limestone pillars with such clean lines. The level of craftsmanship suggests a learned skill set passed down over generations, not the improvisation of a nomadic tribe. Nabta Playa, thousands of kilometers away in the Sahara, presents an equally baffling picture. Dating to around 6000 BCE, it sits in a region that was once a lush savanna. The stone circle there is aligned to the rising sun at the summer solstice and appears to encode the movement of certain stars. Some researchers argue that its builders understood the precession of the equinoxes, a knowledge traditionally attributed to civilizations like the Greeks or Egyptians thousands of years later. Whether or not this claim is universally accepted, the evidence of astronomical awareness is undeniable. The stones are arranged in a way that indicates repeated observation over long periods, something that would require continuity and stability rather than the unpredictability of nomadic life. The Gössek Circle in Germany adds another layer to the mystery. Constructed around 4900 BCE, it consists of concentric ditches and wooden palisades with gates that align precisely with the sunrise and sunset of the winter solstice. This site, too, appears far earlier than any supposed diffusion of agricultural societies from the Near East into Europe. Its creators understood geometry, measurement, and seasonal cycles at a depth that contradicts the idea of isolated development. The combination of wood and earth suggests adaptation to local materials, yet the underlying concept, the astronomical alignment, matches structures thousands of kilometers away. What makes these sites extraordinary is not just their sophistication, but their separation. Karahan Tepe lies in Anatolia, Nabta Playa deep in the African desert, and Gössek in Central Europe. They were built by groups assumed to have no contact, no shared language, and no mutual ancestry within reasonable time proximity. Yet all three display an identical mindset, an obsession with the sky, the cycles of the sun, and the mapping of time onto the land. Their builders carved their understanding of the heavens into the landscape with stones and soil, producing monuments that would last for millennia. The logistical challenges alone raise questions. Transporting multi-ton stones without wheels or domesticated animals requires coordination rarely attributed to early societies. Carving them with stone tools demands patience, technique, and generational continuity. Aligning them to celestial markers requires persistent observation year after year. These are not the works of people drifting across the land without roots. They imply settlements, social organization, and knowledge systems that functioned with purpose. And yet, conventional history continues to classify these builders as primitive. The narrative insists that true civilization began only after agriculture, after cities, after writing. But the evidence buried in these early sites stubbornly refuses to fit that timeline. The stones insist on a different story, a story in which knowledge existed before agriculture, before states, before recorded history. A story in which the sky served as the first textbook and the landscape as the first memory, shaping a network of sites that echo each other across continents. If these structures represent the surviving remnants of a much older knowledge tradition, then the logical question becomes, where did that tradition originate? And how far did it spread before disappearing from memory? The answer may lie not only in what was built, but in what was left unbuilt, vast gaps between the sites that suggest a network once far larger than what survives today. Across the distant regions of Anatolia, the Sahara, and Central Europe, the archaeological evidence reveals a pattern that is too consistent to ignore. Although the builders of these sites supposedly lived in isolation from one another, they used techniques that reflect a shared understanding of stone, alignment, and geometry. Karahan Tepe's limestone pillars, Nabta Playa's solstice markers, and the structured gates of Gössek Circle all demonstrate a mindset more advanced than what is expected from their eras. The most perplexing detail is the absence of metal tools. Every structure shows signs of careful shaping, yet excavations yield only stone and bone implements. How these early builders achieved smooth surfaces, tight-fitting joints, and precisely measured angles remains unexplained. Modern attempts using the same tools often produce coarse, uneven results. This suggests that either the ancient builders possessed techniques we do not understand, or they refined their skills over a far longer period than archaeological models allow. Transportation creates an even greater mystery. Karahan Tepe's pillars were carved from quarries kilometers away, requiring organization and a method of movement capable of handling stones weighing several tons. Nabta Playa's builders faced similar challenges in a once fertile but demanding environment. Gosek required measured planning to create concentric rings and gates aligned with celestial markers. These tasks demand stability, cooperation, and continuity, elements rarely attributed to pre-agricultural societies. Even the placement of these monuments raises questions. Many stand on elevated ground, ideal for observing the sky. Others sit near ancient lakes or rivers where seasonal gatherings could occur. The geographic distribution suggests intention, not random construction. In some cases, the sites align along latitudinal paths that hint at a shared geographic awareness. Though conventional archaeology dismisses such patterns as coincidence, the recurrence across vastly different landscapes argues otherwise. The chronological spread complicates matters further. Karahan Tepe dates to around 9500 BCE, Nabta Playa appears around 6000 BCE, Gosek's Circle around 4900 BCE. Newgrange and Stonehenge come even later. Yet despite these gaps, the same underlying principles reappear: a fascination with solstices, lunar cycles, and celestial geometry. This does not resemble a simple chain of influence. It looks like the resurfacing of knowledge that had been carried, forgotten, and then reborn in different regions. The oldest structures are often the most sophisticated. This directly contradicts the expected progression of human innovation. Typically, technology improves over time, but here, the earliest sites show the highest precision. Later ones copy the ideas but sometimes lack the original mastery. This pattern implies that something was lost and later rediscovered in simpler forms. Instead of innovation moving forward, it appears to have moved backwards. This leads many researchers to consider that these societies inherited techniques from an earlier knowledge tradition, one that existed before the global disruptions of the late Ice Age. A culture capable of planning multi-ton architecture, organizing communities across long distances, and encoding celestial cycles into stone. Its remnants would have survived only in memory, transmitted orally and rebuilt wherever survivors settled. New technologies reinforce this idea. LiDAR scans show hidden structures beneath the surface, often precisely oriented like their visible counterparts. Ground-penetrating radar reveals circular foundations too eroded to be seen from above. Soil analysis indicates repeated visitation, suggesting the monument served generations beyond their original builders. These clues depict a legacy maintained over centuries, long after the original culture had disappeared. The combined evidence points toward a larger framework of understanding, one in which early humans were not isolated, primitive groups, but the last inheritors of knowledge that stretched across continents. They carved that knowledge into stone circles not merely as ceremonial markers, but as tools for tracking time, anchoring memory, and preserving a worldview centered on the sky. If these sites truly represent nodes of a broader prehistoric system, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What connected them? How did ideas travel across such vast distances, and what purpose did this ancient network serve? The answer emerges in a theory that challenges everything we know about the Stone Age, a theory suggesting that long before writing or cities, the sky itself became humanity's first medium of communication. The more researchers studied the early stone circles, the clearer it became that they did not stand alone. Their alignments, measurements, and repeated geometric choices suggested an underlying logic that stretched far beyond any single region. From this realization emerged one of the most provocative ideas in modern archaeology: the possibility that early humans used the sky itself as a communication system. Long before writing appeared, long before villages grew into cities, a network may have existed that linked scattered groups across continents through shared observation of the heavens. Some scholars describe it as a symbolic network. Others choose a more daring name: the Stone Age Internet. The theory begins with something simple but extraordinary. Stone circles in places as distant as Anatolia, North Africa, and Central Europe are aligned to the same celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, and lunar standstills repeat again and again. These events occurred everywhere on Earth at the same moment, meaning communities could synchronize their activities without direct contact. A solstice sunrise viewed in Turkey was the same solstice sunrise seen in Britain. If the builders were using the sky as a calendar, then their structures acted as permanent anchors, letting distant groups mark time in the same way. This alone would allow cultural rituals, migrations, and gatherings to follow shared cycles. But a synchronized calendar is only the starting point. Archaeologists discovered that many circles are positioned on elevated ground or ridgelines where light, sunlight, reflected moonlight, or firelight can travel far. In several regions, surveys reveal sequences of high points that form natural communication chains. A single strong fire on one hilltop could be seen from the next, then passed to a third. Some cultures polished quartz or wet stone surfaces to reflect moonlight. Others used narrow passages in stone constructions to focus beams of light on specific days. These signals would not convey complex messages, but could announce the arrival of a group, the beginning of a gathering, or the timing of a ritual. In this sense, light became a tool of coordination across wide landscapes. Cultural transmission provides another piece of the puzzle. The repeated geometric logic found in distant regions implies that ideas were moving, even when people themselves were not traveling long distances. Groups who observed the same sky could recreate the same structures based on a shared understanding of cycles and shadows. The method did not need writing. It relied on generations of teaching, seasonal gatherings, and oral memory. When groups met at predictable times, guided by the sky, they exchanged knowledge about stoneworking, measurement, and symbolism. Over centuries, this allowed concepts to spread across regions without requiring large migrations. The precision of these structures strengthens the theory. Karahan Tepe, Nabta Playa, Gösek's Circle, and later sites like Newgrange all measure the sun's path with astonishing accuracy. The angle of the winter solstice sunrise is captured with near-identical methods in multiple countries. Such consistency cannot be coincidence. It suggests a shared toolkit of observation: fixed horizon markers, shadow-casting stones, and standardized approaches to dividing the year. These techniques were not invented separately. They appear to belong to a knowledge tradition older than any one site. The sky also provided continuity during a period of immense change. After the Ice Age, coastlines shifted, climates fluctuated, and animal migrations changed rapidly. The heavens were the only stable reference. By anchoring meaning in predictable celestial cycles, early humans created a sense of order amid chaos. Stone circles may have served as centers where groups reaffirmed identity, exchanged knowledge, and synchronized their movements with seasonal rhythms. Some researchers argue that these structures functioned as gathering nodes. They appear along migration corridors, at seasonal water sources, or at places where herds once passed. Groups moving along these paths could follow the solstice or equinox to know when to meet. A circle aligned to the summer solstice might mark the moment of yearly travel. Another, aligned to the winter solstice, might signal a return. These structures were not isolated religious monuments. They were tools for navigation, social renewal, and memory. The deeper this theory is explored, the more compelling it becomes. The stones do not simply point to the sky, they link people through it. They enable different communities to track the same cycles, recognize the same celestial events, and align their lives to the same rhythm. In doing so, They created a shared framework that transcended language, territory, and distance. If this network truly existed, it raises profound questions. How far did it spread? How much knowledge was exchanged through it? And did all of this come from scattered groups slowly discovering the same ideas, or from an older source of wisdom carried forward from a much earlier age? If the sky acted as a shared reference system, then the structures themselves became tools that amplified this connection. Many stone circles were engineered to manipulate light in ways that would have been visible from extraordinary distances. Some used narrow gaps between stones to capture the first rays of the solstice sunrise, projecting a bright line of light inward like a signal. Others used tall stones positioned so that their shadows stretched across long corridors, marking not only a single day, but the gradual approach of a celestial event. These effects would have been unmistakable to anyone watching from a nearby ridge or valley. Even groups far from the circle itself could interpret the timing simply by seeing when the light appeared. This idea is reinforced by discoveries of polished stone fragments at certain sites. While not true mirrors, these stones could reflect moonlight strongly enough to create glimmers across dark landscapes. In regions where visibility extended for kilometers, a reflected flash may have served as a cue for travelers or neighboring groups. Combined with firelight, these features could act as long-range beacons. The technology was simple: light, shadow, stone, but the coordination behind it required shared understanding and predictable celestial timing. Another clue lies in the carvings found on various megaliths. At several sites in Anatolia, motifs resemble constellations mapped in geometric form. Some researchers argue that these represent star clusters as they appeared around 10,000 BCE. Symbols found in faraway sites echo similar patterns, though simplified by time and culture. Even if not universally accepted, these correlations hint that early humans encoded celestial knowledge into stone as a means of preserving and transmitting it. This would allow groups separated by great distances to share a common narrative about the sky's movement. Such carvings also suggest an advanced awareness of long-term cycles. Alignments to lunar standstills imply knowledge of an 18.6-year pattern, something that cannot be discovered accidentally in a single lifetime. For this information to survive, communities needed continuity, teaching young observers, maintaining memory across generations, and rebuilding structures when needed. This depth of knowledge contradicts the assumption that early humans were too preoccupied with survival to track astronomical cycles lasting decades. One of the most intriguing aspects of the theory is the possibility that these stone circles served as encoded maps. By aligning stones to particular stars, builders may have created symbolic landscapes that mirrored the sky above. This pattern, seen in later cultures such as the Egyptians, may have far older roots. If early humans believed their environment reflected celestial order, then building stone circles was not merely a ritual act, it was a way to inscribe the cosmos onto the earth. Such inscriptions would communicate stories, migrations, and origins, even to groups who spoke different languages. The uniformity across distant sites implies that these ideas spread widely. But how did this transmission occur without writing? The answer may lie in seasonal gatherings, where groups met at predictable times guided by the same celestial markers. During these meetings, knowledge could be exchanged orally: how to align stones, how to measure shadows, which constellations signaled particular seasons. Over centuries, this information traveled farther than the people themselves, carried from group to group along migration corridors. Ritual played a role as well. Many of these sites show signs of repeated use over long periods. Hearths, offerings, and wear patterns indicate that communities return to them annually or generationally. These gatherings reinforced shared identities and passed knowledge forward. Even if the original purpose was forgotten, the structure itself preserved the method. A stone facing the solstice retained its alignment long after the builders were gone. Later groups could rediscover its meaning simply by watching the sunrise. The consistency of the alignments also suggests that the builders saw the sky not only as a calendar, but as a source of authority. In a world shaped by dramatic climate change, predictable celestial events offered stability. By tying their monuments to the heavens, early humans anchored their culture to something unchanging. This may explain why the same concepts appear repeatedly across regions. The sky provided a universal framework for order, belief, and communication. Taken together, all these elements form the foundation of the Stone Age Internet theory. It was not a network in the modern sense, but a system in which celestial events acted as universal signals. Light, shadow, geometry, and landscape created a shared language that connected people across vast territories. Knowledge moved slowly, but it moved steadily, and over thousands of years, this movement shaped the architecture and worldview of early humanity. Yet even this theory cannot explain everything. Some features of the stone circles show a level of precision far beyond what simple observation should allow. Certain alignments match astronomical positions with errors so small they approach modern measurements. In some sites, stones appear to mark events that repeat over centuries, not decades. These details raise questions science has not yet answered and lead directly to a deeper mystery. Why these early builders displayed abilities that today seem far beyond their technological reach. As archaeologists examined the world's oldest stone circles, they began to face a set of contradictions that modern science could not easily resolve. These sites were built thousands of years before metal tools, writing, or organized states, yet they show precision, planning, and technical understanding far beyond what a pre-agricultural society is expected to achieve. The deeper the evidence went, the more the accepted timeline of human development began to look incomplete. One unresolved problem is accuracy. Aligning stones to solstice or equinox angles within less than 1 degree requires consistent measurement and long observation. But early builders had no compasses, no metal instruments, and no written calculations. Experiments using Stone Age tools rarely produce the same precision because changes in soil, weather, and horizon shape distort measurements. Despite these obstacles, ancient builders achieved alignment after alignment with remarkable consistency, suggesting a level of knowledge transmission that archaeology cannot fully explain. Engineering raises even more questions. Many stones weigh 10 to 30 tons or more. Without wheels, pulleys, or animals, moving such blocks would be extremely difficult. Yet the builders transported them over kilometers, then placed them into foundations, leveled them, and oriented them carefully. This level of coordination implies leadership, planning, and stability uncommon in small nomadic groups. Tool evidence is equally puzzling. Excavations reveal only stone and bone tools, yet the surfaces of many pillars are smooth, shaped, and intentionally worked. Achieving such finishes with primitive tools requires enormous time and skill. If ancient groups were constantly moving to follow seasons and herds, how did they preserve specialized craftsmanship long enough to complete these projects? Another question involves technological progression. Most technologies appear gradually in the archaeological record, but megalithic architecture does not. The earliest sites, Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, Nabta Playa, are among the most sophisticated. Later structures sometimes show reduced complexity, not increased. Instead of evolving forward, the knowledge seems to decline, as if the earliest builders inherited techniques that later groups only partially understood. Geographical patterns complicate the picture. Similar architectural logic appears across regions with no evidence of direct contact. Turkey, North Africa, Central Europe, and the British Isles all developed circles aligned to solstices and lunar cycles. Cultural diffusion cannot easily explain such precision over such distances. Oral tradition would normally produce variations, yet the repeated concepts remain strangely consistent. A further problem is generational continuity. Tracking an 18.6-year lunar cycle requires observers across decades. Maintaining that knowledge requires teaching structures and memory systems. But these societies left no signs of written records or administrative organization. How did groups with limited resources preserve complex astronomical data for so long? Another anomaly is the disappearance of this knowledge. If early humans possessed advanced measurement and planning abilities, why did many later cultures fail to maintain them? Why do some regions show a decline in precision after the earliest constructions? This suggests the knowledge was not improving, but fading, a pattern difficult to reconcile with standard models of cultural development. Modern scanning technologies deepen the puzzle. LiDAR surveys reveal hidden circular foundations beneath soil that match the alignments of visible structures. Ground-penetrating radar uncovers buried features arranged with similar geometry. These findings show that many sites were far larger and more complex than previously assumed. Yet the builders left almost nothing behind except the stones themselves. No diagrams, no storage buildings, no clear records of how or why such effort was invested. Without text, science can only measure the results, not the methods. This gap creates an uncomfortable possibility that a significant part of early human knowledge has been lost, leaving only the architectural shadows of a once coherent system. Archaeologists often attribute the monuments to ritual behavior or seasonal gatherings, but such explanations fail to address the precision, planning, and unusual consistency shared across continents. Something is missing, something that once linked distant groups and allowed them to achieve feats far beyond what their era should have permitted. If these structures truly preserve the remnants of a forgotten tradition, then understanding that tradition requires looking beyond standard models. Chapter 4 reveals limits in scientific explanations, and these limits point toward a deeper mystery behind the stones, one that may extend further back than the monuments themselves. If the earliest builders possessed skills that seem out of place in their era, then the question becomes, where did those skills originate? This is where the scientific explanations begin to weaken, because the evidence does not point to gradual development. Instead, it suggests the presence of knowledge that appears suddenly, is used with great precision for a period of time, and then fades. This unusual pattern forces researchers to consider possibilities outside the traditional framework. One difficulty lies in reconstructing how these early societies functioned. Archaeology relies heavily on physical remains, tools, bones, hearths, pottery. But the builders of stone circles left almost nothing except the stones themselves. No writing, no storage structures, no administrative objects. Without these, reconstructing their social organization becomes guesswork. We can measure the stones, but we cannot measure the reasoning that placed them. We can identify the alignments, but we cannot identify the teachers who passed these methods down. The absence of supporting infrastructure is particularly troubling. If such precise architecture required skilled specialists and long-term planning, where are the dwellings of those specialists? Where are the training areas or the debris from failed attempts? At many sites, domestic remains are minimal or missing entirely. It is as if the builders arrived, constructed something meaningful, and then disappeared, leaving a finished structure without the usual footprint of a living community. Another unresolved problem is the similarity of techniques across distant regions. Even if different groups discovered the same celestial cycles independently, the architectural solutions should vary more than they do. Yet the use of circular enclosures, sighting stones, and horizon markers repeats again and again. These parallels suggest that the builders inherited a shared conceptual framework, a blueprint carried in memory rather than written form. Such memory traditions can survive for long periods, but only if anchored to consistent rituals or gatherings. Without writing, however, these traditions eventually erode, which may explain why later sites appear less sophisticated. Scientific models also struggle to explain the purpose behind such effort. Aligning stones to track seasons is practical, but why use multi-ton stones when smaller markers could achieve the same result? Why invest decades of labor into structures that outlast the builders by thousands of years? The scale exceeds functional necessity and points to a cultural philosophy that modern researchers cannot fully understand. It implies a worldview in which celestial order was central to identity, survival, and perhaps communication. There is also the question of the sudden decline in complexity. If knowledge naturally evolves, later structures should show clearer techniques, better planning, and more specialized craftsmanship. Instead, many later monuments seem simplified, as though the original methods were remembered only partially. This decline supports the idea of lost knowledge, knowledge that once existed at a level higher than what the archaeological record predicts. Some researchers attempt to explain this through population changes, climate stress, or migration, but these factors usually produce gradual shifts, not sudden gaps. The transition from highly complex early sites to simpler later ones resembles the loss of an older tradition rather than its improvement. It suggests that the earliest builders were not pioneers but inheritors, carrying a fragment of something older into a world recovering from catastrophe. Modern evidence from scanning technologies only intensifies these questions. LiDAR surveys reveal that many sites once formed part of larger complexes, now buried or eroded. Some include hidden enclosures aligned to celestial events that would have required even more planning than the visible structures. Ground-penetrating radar shows buried stones arranged with deliberate geometry, indicating that what survives today may be only a fraction of the original design. These discoveries force scientists to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Early humans were operating with a level of mathematical and observational skill that has no clear origin in the archaeological timeline. Their abilities seem too advanced for their era, yet too inconsistent to belong to a long, stable tradition. This contradiction suggests that something important is missing, a missing link in human knowledge. The limits of scientific explanation are not a weakness of science, but a sign that the available evidence is incomplete. Archaeology can only interpret what remains, and in the case of megalithic structures, the builders left almost nothing except the stones themselves. These stones record outcomes, not processes. They preserve alignments, not instructions. They speak of a culture capable of extraordinary precision, yet silent about how that precision was achieved. If the earliest monuments around the world reflect inherited knowledge from a lost period, then science is still standing outside the doorway of a forgotten chapter. Chapter 4 reveals where the conventional explanations fail and opens the path to an even deeper mystery. If the builders inherited this knowledge, what was the original source? As modern technology advanced, new discoveries began revealing details that earlier generations could never detect. What once seemed like isolated stone circles suddenly appeared to be linked by subtle patterns visible only through aerial scanning, laser measurements, and digital reconstruction. These tools, unknown just decades ago, revived interest in the theory of a prehistoric communication network, suggesting that the builders may have encoded far more information into their monuments than earlier researchers realized. By 2024, several breakthroughs helped redefine what the stones might represent. One of the most significant findings came from high-resolution laser scanning at several megalithic sites. When the data from different regions were compared, researchers noticed shared angular relationships between stones, sometimes matching alignments in sites thousands of kilometers apart. These patterns were invisible on the ground, but clear in digital overlays. Some alignments pointed toward solstice sunrise, others toward lunar standstills, and a few toward specific stars prominent in the sky around 10,000 BCE. The surprising part was not the alignments themselves, but how consistently they matched across distant cultures. The same astronomical solutions appeared repeatedly, as if the builders were following a single, ancient template. Another discovery involved the way stones were positioned relative to the landscape. At several sites, the alignments extended beyond the circle itself, pointing toward distant hills, water sources, or horizon dips. When plotted on modern maps, these extended lines intersected with other prehistoric sites. This suggested that the builders were not only marking the sky, but also connecting locations on the ground. A solstice alignment in Turkey pointed toward a horizon dip mirrored by a similar formation in the British Isles. These connections raised the possibility that stone circles functioned as nodes in a broader network of knowledge, mapping both the land and the heavens. Advances in satellite imaging added to the mystery. In 2023 and 2024, new scans revealed faint geometric outlines beneath soil layers near known stone circles. Some of these hidden structures formed rectangles, spirals, or intersecting lines aligned with celestial events. Others suggested earlier construction phases or older foundations beneath the visible stones. These features indicated that what stands today might be the newest version of far older traditions, renovations of earlier designs rather than original inventions. If the builders were restoring older structures, they must have inherited a blueprint that had already existed for centuries. Data from carbon dating provided further support. At several sites, new samples pushed the construction dates older than previously estimated. Karahan Tepe's associated structures, once believed to be around 9,400 BCE, now appear slightly older. Some stones buried beneath Nabta Playa seem to predate the main circle. Even in Europe, the earliest wooden enclosures of Göcek show signs of earlier occupation. These revised dates suggest that the knowledge behind the monuments did not emerge suddenly, but was carried and adapted across wide regions for thousands of years. One of the more intriguing developments came from attempts to reconstruct ancient star maps. When researchers compared the carvings found on certain pillars with digital reconstructions of the night sky around 10,000 BCE, they found possible matches with star groupings now shifted by precession. Some patterns resembled stellium arrangements, clusters of bright stars rising together during significant periods of the Earth's orbital cycle. Whether intentional or coincidental, the correlation hinted that the builders might have encoded star lore into their stones, preserving astronomical knowledge in symbolic form. These discoveries revived the idea that stone circles acted as a kind of prehistoric communication system. Not communication through words or symbols in the modern sense, but through shared celestial events and architectural patterns. When the solstice sun rose through a specific alignment, communities across distant regions experienced the same moment. When a lunar standstill cast an unusually long shadow, the event was replicated across continents. If builders encoded these cycles into stone, they created a shared way of understanding time, not just for one group, but for many. The consistency of these patterns in 2024's data also challenged the assumption that the monuments evolved independently. The same geometric ratios, the same use of extended horizon lines, and the same reliance on celestial cycles imply a long tradition passed down through countless generations. The builders were not discovering these ideas from scratch. They were maintaining something older. The more modern tools revealed, the clearer the possibility became. The knowledge encoded in the stones might be the surviving fragment of a prehistoric worldview that once spanned continents. A worldview that interpreted the sky as a universal language and used stone to preserve its meaning long after its creators had vanished. If these discoveries are connected, they point toward a remarkable conclusion: that the builders of stone circles were not simply marking time, but preserving a cosmic framework inherited from ancestors who lived through one of the most dramatic periods in Earth's recent history. As new technologies exposed hidden layers beneath ancient landscapes, the idea of a global prehistoric system became harder to dismiss. Each discovery added detail to a picture scientists had never expected to see, one in which early humans recorded knowledge with surprising consistency across vast distances. By 2024, the evidence pointed not only to shared astronomical ideas, but to shared engineering, shared mapping traditions, and perhaps even shared memories of a world that looked very different after the last ice age. Ground-penetrating radar played a major role in this shift. Beneath several stone circles, researchers detected subsurface foundations forming precise geometric shapes, squares within circles, concentric rings, and long corridors aligned to specific horizon points. These buried structures were older than the stones above them, suggesting that the visible monuments were late additions to traditions stretching back centuries. In some cases, the foundations aligned with celestial events no longer visible from the current landscape due to changes in the horizon line, implying that the original builders were working from knowledge adapted over long time spans. LiDAR surveys revealed even wider patterns. In certain regions, faint traces of ancient pathways, embankments, and mounds formed large-scale geometric designs that matched the alignments of nearby stone circles. Some pathways extended for kilometers and connected sites that had never been studied together. In mountainous areas, ridges and saddle points formed natural sightlines between distant sites, creating a chain of elevated markers. These findings suggested that early builders planned construction on a landscape scale, not merely a local one. The stones might have been only the visible tips of a much larger system. Carbon dating of newly uncovered organic materials provided more surprises. Charcoal fragments and bone remains found in layers beneath known monuments pushed certain dates further back than expected. In areas once thought active around 5000 BCE, evidence now pointed to activity centuries earlier. A few samples from desert regions even suggested episodic construction phases spread across millennia, indicating that knowledge was maintained long enough for multiple generations to contribute to the same structures. This longevity contradicts the notion that these were temporary ritual sites created by transient groups. One of the more astonishing discoveries came from comparing astronomical simulations with site orientations. Researchers found that certain alignments matched star positions from a narrow window around the end of the Younger Dryas, when the sky looked slightly different due to precession. This means the builders were not aligning to the sky they saw during their own time, but to a sky remembered from earlier generations, or learned from ancestors who lived through climatic catastrophe. Such precision implies careful tracking of long-term changes, or the preservation of knowledge far older than the structures themselves. These findings led some researchers to reconsider the purpose of the monuments. Instead of viewing them solely as calendars or ceremonial centers, they began to interpret them as repositories of encoded information, stone-based archives preserving calculations, cycles, and cosmic relationships. The structures might have functioned as teaching centers, where each generation relearned the patterns of the sky. The similarity of ratios and angles across distant sites supported the idea of a standardized method taught over centuries. The global distribution of similar ideas remained the most striking part of the mystery. Scotland, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Sweden, the Sahara, and the Iberian Peninsula all show traces of the same conceptual framework. Some researchers suggested a slow, steady diffusion of ideas, but this does not explain the unusual precision or the lack of transitional forms. Others proposed independent invention, yet the repeated geometric logic and identical astronomical priorities argue otherwise. The simplest explanation, though still controversial, is that these ideas had a common origin, spreading outward as survivors of a much older world migrated across new landscapes. Even the symbols carved into the stones gained renewed attention. Spiral motifs, circles within circles, and certain repeated animal forms appeared across thousands of kilometers. While interpretations vary, digital analysis showed that many carvings correspond to predictable celestial patterns or seasonal markers. Some motifs may represent constellations during a time when the sky's orientation differed from today. If correct, the carvings were not decorative, but part of a coded system nested within the architecture itself. By 2024, these diverse findings pointed in a single direction. Early humans were actively preserving a body of knowledge that predated the structures we see today. They encoded astronomical cycles, mapped landscapes, and aligned their monuments to the same celestial logic. Whether this knowledge emerged locally or was inherited from a far older tradition remains uncertain. But the evidence suggests continuity, not coincidence, memory, not improvisation. If these discoveries are accurate, the stone circles were not isolated cultural expressions, but the surviving fragments of a system built during a pivotal moment in human history. A time when the world was reshaped by melting ice, rising seas, and massive environmental change. And a time when the last echoes of an older knowledge tradition may have been carried forward by those who refused to let it fade. The newest wave of discoveries has pushed the mystery of ancient stone circles into even deeper territory. For decades, researchers believed the visible structures represented the full extent of what early builders accomplished. But modern tools have revealed that the stones above ground are often only a fraction of the original design. Hidden beneath the surface lie foundations, chambers, trenches, and geometric layouts far more complex than anything assumed before. These findings suggest that the builders operated with a level of planning and architectural understanding that modern science struggles to reconcile with their supposed technological limitations. Ground-penetrating radar has been crucial in exposing these hidden layers. At multiple sites, GPR readings show large substructures buried beneath the visible circles, rectangular rooms, interconnected tunnels, and deep shafts carved into bedrock. Some features form intricate geometric shapes aligned to the same celestial markers that guide the stones above ground. These underground formations reveal that the builders worked in 3 dimensions, not simply placing stones on the surface, but creating integrated systems below them. Such complexity requires organized labor, long-term planning, and a clear understanding of structural stability. LiDAR scans extend the picture even further. In forested regions, LiDAR imaging strips away vegetation to expose forgotten earthworks, long embankments, raised causeways, and circular ditches that mirror the visible megaliths. Many of these features stretch across kilometers, forming shapes and patterns only visible from above. When mapped, these designs often align with the same solstice and lunar angles encoded into standing stones. This indicates that the builders were not simply constructing isolated monuments, but shaping entire landscapes according to celestial geometry. In some locations, LiDAR revealed pathways connecting distant sites. These routes, sometimes barely perceptible on the ground today, form straight lines linking one stone circle to another. When plotted digitally, these lines intersect at points corresponding to significant astronomical events. The precision of these alignments suggests that early humans were deliberately creating regional networks tied to the movement of the sun and moon. The scale of these networks implies a shared cosmology that extended far beyond any one settlement. Carbon dating of newly uncovered organic remains has reshaped the timeline as well. Material found in deeper layers beneath known structures often predates the visible monuments by centuries. This indicates that stone circles were frequently built atop older ceremonial or astronomical centers. In some desert regions, buried stones arranged in circles or radial lines suggest construction phases spanning generations. Such continuity contradicts the idea of short-lived, sporadic building efforts and instead supports the presence of enduring traditions maintained over long periods. Geometric analysis has uncovered another layer of sophistication. When the dimensions of various circles are compared, distinct ratios emerge, ratios that repeat across continents. Some circles divide into exact fractions of the horizon angle at solstice sunrise. Others match the angular spacing of notable constellations from the sky as it appeared around 10,000 BCE. These patterns are too precise to be accidental. They imply mathematical awareness, even if that knowledge was expressed without written numbers. The builders may not have used mathematics in the way we understand it, but they clearly understood proportion, symmetry, and the predictable movement of celestial bodies. In several sites, researchers discovered that underground chambers were positioned to amplify sound, producing resonant tones during rituals or gatherings. These acoustic features appear intentional and repeat across multiple regions. The idea that early builders combined astronomy, geometry, and acoustics in their structures challenges long-standing assumptions about their intellectual capacity. It suggests that they worked with a holistic understanding of space, integrating light, sound, and movement into the design. Even the soil reveals clues. Microscopic analysis around some stone circles shows imported sediment not native to the region. This means builders transported specific types of earth for ceremonial or structural reasons. Such effort indicates symbolic intent and suggests that the circles were more than functional observatories. They were places of meaning, memory, and tradition. These discoveries paint a picture of societies far more sophisticated than the archaeological record predicts. They planned across generations, coordinated across landscapes, and preserved knowledge that required stability and collective effort. Yet the tools they used were simple. No metal chisels, no written diagrams, no wheeled carts. The contradiction between outcome and available technology is stark, and modern explanations cannot fully bridge the gap. If these early builders possessed knowledge that exceeded their supposed capabilities, then the question deepens. Were they innovators rising suddenly from the chaos of a post-Ice Age world, or inheritors of a much older tradition carried forward after a global upheaval? The rapid growth of scientific tools has created a new era in the study of prehistoric structures. Each year, new layers of information emerge, revealing details that challenge long-held assumptions. What once seemed like simple stone circles now appears to be the surviving surface of a deeply structured world, one shaped by sophisticated planning, hidden geometry, and a level of continuity that stretches back thousands of years. The more scientists uncover, the more the mystery grows. One breakthrough came from multi-frequency GPR, which allowed researchers to scan depths previously unreachable. At several stone circle sites, they detected clusters of buried stones arranged in precise radial patterns. Some formed star-like shapes. Others created long corridors pointing toward ancient horizons now altered by erosion. Many of these features remained untouched for millennia, preserved beneath layers of sediment. Their accuracy suggests they were deliberate parts of the original design, not later additions. These discoveries support the idea that early humans were not building haphazard monuments. They were creating long-lasting frameworks for astronomical and ceremonial purposes. 3D modeling added even greater clarity. When entire landscapes were digitally reconstructed, hidden relationships emerged. Valleys, ridges, and water sources aligned with stone placements in ways that suggested a unified environmental design. At some sites, builders positioned stones to echo the shape of surrounding mountains, creating a mirrored relationship between earth and sky. These parallels hint at a worldview in which humans did not separate themselves from nature, but sought harmony between landforms and celestial cycles. This philosophy, though speculative, is reinforced by the repeated patterns seen across continents. Interdisciplinary teams revealed even more surprising connections. Geologists discovered that some stones used in construction were transported from quarries with specific mineral properties, properties that enhanced acoustic resonance or visual reflectivity. For example, stones with high quartz content appear in regions connected to solstice tracking traditions. Under sunlight or moonlight, these stones reflect subtly brighter glows, making them effective markers for seasonal observances. Whether the builders understood the mineral science consciously or simply relied on tradition, the choice was not random. Archaeobotanical studies uncovered pollen from plants not native to the areas around certain stone circles. This suggests that the builders deliberately planted or imported vegetation to shape the symbolism or function of the site. Some plants bloom around solstices or equinoxes, making their appearance part of the site's experiential design. These details indicate that the circles were not just astronomical instruments, they were living environments calibrated to seasonal cycles. Chemical analysis added another piece of the puzzle. Soil samples around certain monuments contained traces of burned materials that do not match local vegetation. This implies ritual fires or repeated gatherings that introduced foreign materials into the area. If such gatherings involved multiple communities traveling from afar, this would help explain how knowledge, traditions, and architectural methods spread across large distances. It also strengthens the theory that these sites served as meeting grounds rather than isolated constructions. Another significant discovery came from examining erosion patterns. At several sites, stones show wear inconsistent with their current climate. This means they were originally built under different environmental conditions, conditions that match the end of the Ice Age. Such evidence suggests that some monuments are older than previously believed or were built by groups who had inherited techniques from ancestors living in a cooler world. These erosion clues provide indirect support for a much older tradition behind the megalithic structures. The use of LiDAR in desert regions also exposed faint networks of linear paths heading toward ancient water sources and seasonal lakes. These paths connected clusters of stone structures, forming regional systems that operated as coordinated calendars. Their design appears intentional. Routes pointed to sunrise during key seasonal moments, guiding travelers in sync with celestial events. Such patterns would make sense for societies navigating vast open landscapes, relying on predictable markers for survival. The final layer of evidence comes from analyzing construction sequencing. At multiple sites, the earliest stones consistently align with the sky, while later additions often simplify or modify the original design. This decline in precision suggests that later builders were maintaining traditions without fully understanding their original purpose. The complexity fades over time, pointing to a slow loss of knowledge rather than its development. Taken together, these findings form a coherent picture. The earliest stone circles were not isolated ceremonial sites, but part of a larger conceptual system. They combined astronomy, geometry, geology, acoustics, and landscape design in ways that modern science is only beginning to decode. These structures embody a worldview that valued long-term observation, continuity, and the preservation of knowledge across generations. If these interpretations are correct, the megaliths represent far more than ancient monuments. They may be the last surviving fragments of a sophisticated tradition born from the upheavals at the end of the Ice Age. And understanding this tradition is essential for uncovering who these early builders were and what they were trying to preserve before their knowledge faded into obscurity. As the evidence accumulated across continents, a new and unsettling possibility emerged, one that challenges the foundational assumptions of human history. If the earliest stone circles represent inherited knowledge, if their alignments display precision far beyond their era, and if their geometry reveals a shared worldview, then the builders may have been part of a tradition far older than archaeology currently recognizes. They may have carried fragments of a lost civilization, one that emerged before the end of the Ice Age and disappeared long before recorded history began. This idea is controversial, but increasingly difficult to ignore. Conventional models place the rise of complex societies after agriculture, writing, and metallurgy. But the earliest stone monuments contradict this order. They show that long before the first cities, humans were capable of organizing large-scale projects, transmitting knowledge across generations, and preserving astronomical information with remarkable accuracy. These achievements imply intellectual frameworks that should not have existed in supposedly primitive hunter-gatherer societies. One possibility is that these early builders represented the last descendants of communities that survived the climatic chaos of the Younger Dryas. Around 10,800 BCE, dramatic temperature swings, rising seas, and collapsing ecosystems forced populations to move and adapt rapidly. If an organized culture had existed along ancient coastlines, many now submerged, it might have carried advanced knowledge inland as sea levels rose. The scattered monuments found across Africa, Europe, and Western Asia could be the final expression of that displaced culture. This idea gains traction when considering erosion patterns and ancient shoreline maps. Many early sites lie near regions that would have been coastlines before sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. If early groups relied on coastal resources, their knowledge centers might now be underwater. What remains on land could be survival outposts, places where knowledge was preserved before being dispersed and eventually forgotten. What stands out most is the coherence of the worldview encoded in these structures. The emphasis on solstices, lunar cycles, and celestial symmetry suggests a cosmology grounded in long-term observation. This worldview does not emerge suddenly. It is the product of sustained attention over generations. Communities needed stable traditions, teaching systems, and shared rituals that kept this knowledge alive. Yet the archaeological record shows no obvious origin for such systems, only their sudden appearance and gradual disappearance. Such patterns raise questions about how much of early human history has been lost. Written records extend back only a few thousand years. Oral traditions can stretch further but eventually dissolve. Stone, however, endures. If the builders used stone circles to preserve fragments of inherited knowledge, then these monuments may be the last echoes of a much older story, a story largely erased by time, climate, and the shifting landscapes of the post-glacial world. Another striking element is the global spread of similar ideas. Solstice-aligned structures appear in regions separated by deserts, mountains, and seas. Their geometry follows shared ratios. Their symbolism echoes common themes. These parallels are difficult to explain through coincidence or isolated development. They hint at a deeper unity that predates regional cultures, a unity that once linked groups through shared memory rather than trade or conquest. Even the decline of this knowledge fits the broader pattern. As generations passed and environmental pressures changed, the original meaning behind the monuments may have faded. Later builders maintained the traditions but simplified them. Over time, the once sophisticated system fragmented into regional variations. By the time recorded civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the older tradition had already dissolved, leaving only scattered monuments whose original purpose was no longer fully understood. This raises a question with profound implications. If early humans inherited knowledge from a vanished culture, what else might have been lost? Did they understand cycles of the sky in ways we do not? Did they track long-term Earth changes using methods we have not yet rediscovered? Were the stone circles teaching tools meant to preserve cosmic principles? These questions are not merely speculative. They determine how we interpret the origins of organized human thought. If the earliest monuments reveal continuity with a forgotten past, then the standard timeline of human development must be reconsidered. The idea that civilization began suddenly in the Fertile Crescent becomes less certain. Instead, humanity's intellectual roots may stretch far deeper into prehistory, shaped by upheaval, memory, and the determination of survivors to preserve what they could. What remains clear is that the stone circles were not simple ritual markers. They were repositories of meaning, built by people who understood the world in ways that modern science is only beginning to reconstruct. Their builders may have disappeared, but their knowledge lingers in the patterns, angles, and alignments carved into the earth. If the stone circles preserve fragments of a forgotten worldview, then their existence forces us to consider what it means for our understanding of human history. For decades, textbooks have presented the development of civilization as a rise from simplicity to complexity, beginning with farming, progressing to settlements, then states, and finally to cities. But the early megaliths do not fit this ladder. Instead, they look like the remnants of an intellectual tradition already mature when agriculture was still in its infancy. This reversal challenges modern assumptions. It suggests that organized knowledge, astronomy, geometry, long-term planning did not emerge because of agriculture, but may have existed long before it. Early humans might have developed sophisticated ways of understanding their world out of necessity during times of environmental stress. In this view, complexity did not bloom after stability. It survived through instability, carried by communities determined to keep their traditions alive through turbulent ages. One of the most striking implications is that civilization might not be a linear process. Instead of a steady ascent, human history may contain arcs of rise, disruption, survival, and renewal. The builders of stone circles could represent one of these arcs, descendants of a culture disrupted by climate events, rebuilding fragments of knowledge in new landscapes. Later cultures, unaware of this inheritance, may have believed they were inventing new ideas, when in fact they were reviving ancient principles in simplified forms. This perspective also reshapes how we interpret myth. Many ancient stories speak of an older age, a time of knowledge lost to disaster. Flood myths, sky watchers, teacher figures who brought order after chaos. For centuries, scholars dismissed these tales as symbolic, but the stone circles give them new context. They may reflect distant memories of real upheavals and the people who survived them. If so, myth becomes not merely imagination, but a vessel carrying echoes of a much older world. Another important consequence concerns the origins of scientific thought. If early humans tracked solstices, lunar cycles, and stellar patterns with such precision, then they possessed observational discipline equal to later astronomers. They lacked metal tools, but not intelligence. They lacked writing, but not memory. Their achievements suggest that scientific reasoning, pattern recognition, measurement, prediction, existed long before recorded science. This realization places the roots of scientific thinking deep in prehistory, far earlier than generally assumed. The possibility of a global prehistoric network further complicates the picture. If distant groups shared similar concepts despite geographic barriers, they must have maintained long-term connections, either through migration routes, seasonal gatherings, or inherited traditions. Such networks would imply a level of social organization that does not fit the typical model of small, isolated bands of hunter-gatherers. It suggests movement, communication, and shared identity across large territories. But the most powerful implication is the one that makes researchers uneasy. If a forgotten civilization contributed to the knowledge behind these structures, then our timeline of human development is incomplete. We may be missing entire chapters that explain how humanity first learned to measure time, map landscapes, and interpret the sky. Without those chapters, the megaliths seem anomalous. With them, They become markers of continuity across a much longer span of human experience. This possibility opens a new direction in research. Scholars now consider rising sea levels after the Ice Age as a key factor. Vast coastal plains, ideal habitats for early humans, are now underwater. Any settlements that once existed there would be unreachable without deep-sea archaeology. If early centers of knowledge were submerged, their disappearance would explain why only inland monuments remain. These inland sites may be the last visible traces of cultures whose true heartlands lie beneath the oceans. The discovery of submerged structures in various parts of the world, though still debated, adds weight to this idea. Stone formations on ancient coastlines off India, Japan, and the Mediterranean hint that human activity flourished in areas now drowned. If these structures predate known civilizations, they might connect directly to the traditions preserved in inland stone circles. For now, these possibilities remain hypotheses, but they highlight the importance of continued exploration. Every new technique, LiDAR, underwater scanning, genetic mapping, has the potential to reveal another piece of the puzzle. And each piece brings us closer to understanding the origins of human knowledge. Ultimately, the stone circles force us to confront a simple question with profound consequences. What if the story of civilization did not begin where we think it did? What if the first great leaps in human understanding occurred not in the valleys of ancient rivers, but in the forgotten landscapes of a world transformed by ice and sea? If this is true, then humanity has already lived through at least one lost chapter, a chapter written not in books, but in stone. As the weight of new evidence grows, researchers find themselves facing a difficult but unavoidable reality. The world's oldest monuments contain far more information than previously believed, yet they also sit on the edge of irreversible loss. Many sites are eroding, buried, or threatened by modern development. Others lie in areas where political instability makes excavation impossible. If the stone circles truly preserve remnants of a forgotten knowledge system, then the window to study them may be narrowing. This urgency has sparked a new generation of interdisciplinary research, combining archaeology, astronomy, geology, and digital mapping in ways never attempted before. One of the main goals of future research is to reconstruct the ancient sky as precisely as possible. Because the Earth's axial tilt shifts slowly over millennia, the positions of stars during the early Holocene differ from those seen today. Understanding these ancient star positions may reveal why certain alignments were chosen. Some structures aim at points on the horizon where no major celestial event occurs today. But when adjusted for precession, those same lines point to important stars or significant rising points from 10,000 or 12,000 years ago. Reconstructing these skies helps determine whether the builders encoded astronomical memories passed down from an even older period. Landscape reconstruction is equally important. Meltwater from the end of the Ice Age reshaped coastlines, rivers, and lakes. Many valleys visible today did not exist when the earliest monuments were built, while other regions now underwater were once habitable land. By rebuilding paleogeographic maps, scientists hope to trace migration routes used by early humans and understand how knowledge may have traveled. These reconstructions can also reveal why certain high points or ridge lines became favored sites for stone circles. They may have been central markers in landscapes that looked dramatically different from today. Another promising method involves deep subsurface scanning. As GPR becomes more sensitive, researchers can detect structures several meters below ground. Already, new enclosures, ditches, and buried pillars have been found beneath known monuments. Future scans may uncover entire complexes that lie hidden today. Each new discovery helps fill gaps in the timeline, revealing whether different regions built their monuments independently or as part of a broader tradition that persisted across centuries. Genetic research contributes another perspective. By studying ancient DNA from human remains near stone circle sites, scientists can map population movements over time. Early results suggest that some regions experienced repeated waves of migration from areas affected by drastic climate shifts. These migrations could explain similarities across distant cultures. If groups carrying shared knowledge traditions dispersed across continents, they may have rebuilt their monuments according to inherited principles, even when isolated geographically. Digital reconstruction also plays a vital role. By building 3D models of both visible and buried structures, researchers can test how light, shadow, and sound behaved within ancient environments. These simulations reveal how solstice light entered specific chambers, or how resonance patterns amplified sound during rituals. Such insights are critical for understanding the intended functions of the structures, whether they served purely astronomical roles or also hosted ceremonial gatherings that reinforced cultural identity. Despite these advances, major challenges remain. Many sites sit in fragile landscapes that continue to erode. Wind and rain slowly wear the stones, while agricultural activities disturb surrounding soil layers. Without protective measures, key information may vanish before it can be recorded. The risk is especially high for buried structures, which collapse or degrade when soil shifts or roots penetrate their foundations. Time, which preserved these monuments for thousands of years, is now working against them. This makes documentation more urgent than ever. High-resolution scans, detailed mapping, carbon dating, and material analysis must be carried out before the sites degrade further. Once a stone cracks or a buried wall collapses, its informational value drops sharply. Some researchers push for emergency excavation in areas most at risk, arguing that waiting could result in the loss of irreplaceable clues about early human knowledge. In the broader scientific community, debates continue about how far the implications of these discoveries should go. Some scholars argue that the evidence suggests a level of continuity between early and later cultures, not a lost civilization. Others believe the anomalies point to a deeper story, one in which a sophisticated tradition survived the end of the Ice Age and influenced early societies more than previously acknowledged. Regardless of interpretation, the need for further research is clear. What matters most now is that the investigations are reaching a critical stage. For the first time, technology allows researchers to peer beneath the ground, read ancient skies, and analyze landscapes in ways that were impossible just a decade ago. The stones may still hold answers, but only if science moves quickly enough to uncover them before nature and time erase what remains. As research progresses, one of the most important shifts involves the kinds of questions scientists are now willing to ask. For decades, archaeology approached megalithic structures as isolated ritual or ceremonial sites. Their astronomical alignments were treated as interesting coincidences or symbolic gestures rather than intentional engineering choices. But the accumulation of precise patterns has forced researchers to reconsider these assumptions. Future investigations must focus not only on what the structures are, but why they were built with such consistency across continents. A new area of focus is the study of knowledge transmission without writing. How did early societies preserve long-term information? Modern researchers are exploring the idea of memory architecture, in which stone structures serve as physical frameworks for teaching complex cycles. Alignments, ratios, and geometric divisions may have acted as mnemonic devices, allowing communities to retain astronomical data across centuries. If this is correct, the stone circles were not only observatories, but educational systems designed to preserve inherited knowledge. Another promising approach involves integrating acoustic, visual, and spatial modeling. Some sites show unique sound behavior, tones amplified at specific points, or resonance triggered during gatherings. Light simulations reveal how sunrise or moonlight highlighted carvings or pathways at key moments. By combining these models, researchers are beginning to reconstruct how the monuments felt and functioned during ceremonies. These sensory experiences may have played a role in reinforcing cultural memory and teaching generational skills, turning the structures into immersive knowledge centers rather than static monuments. Theories about global connections are also entering a new phase. Instead of looking for direct contact between distant regions, scientists are now examining whether shared environmental pressures, like post-Ice Age sea level rise, created similar cultural responses around the world. For instance, groups displaced from coastal homelands might have independently built inland monuments to preserve memories of their past, leading to parallel structures rooted in a common ancestral tradition. This model does not require long-distance travel, only a shared legacy carried by migrating populations. Underwater archaeology may hold some of the most transformative discoveries. Ancient shorelines once housed large populations, but today lie submerged beneath tens or hundreds of meters of water. These lost landscapes could contain the original centers of knowledge that later inspired inland megalithic traditions. Investigations near former Ice Age coastlines have already revealed stone formations and possible habitation sites. While their interpretation remains debated, continued exploration may uncover settlements predating known civilizations by thousands of years. Scientific models must also adapt to the possibility that early humans were more mobile and interconnected than traditionally believed. Genetic studies show that populations moved across vast distances during the early Holocene. These movements could have facilitated the spread of shared cosmologies, rituals, and architectural principles. Instead of isolated tribes, early societies may have formed expansive networks of seasonal gatherings, exchanging ideas during migration cycles in ways still reflected in the alignments of their monuments. Interdisciplinary collaboration is crucial in this phase. Astronomers, geologists, architects, computer scientists, and anthropologists must work together to decode the multi-layered design embedded in these structures. Each field contributes a piece of the puzzle. Astronomers identify ancient sky positions. Geologists analyze the stone's origins. Architects reconstruct mechanical forces. Computer scientists generate virtual models. Anthropologists interpret ritual and cultural meaning. Only through combined effort can researchers approach a full understanding. The implications extend far beyond the stones themselves. If early humans possessed complex observational systems and preserved knowledge over millennia, then the origins of organized thought may lie much further back in time than most histories acknowledge. This challenges long-standing narratives that frame human advancement as a steady climb from simplicity to complexity. Instead, it suggests a cyclical process: knowledge gained, preserved, disrupted, and partially forgotten. As studies progress, new principles of prehistoric organization may emerge. Researchers may identify how early societies coordinated labor without centralized authority, how they tracked time without writing, and how they encoded information in materials as durable as stone. Such findings could reshape not only archaeology but our understanding of the early human mind. Most importantly, the future of research hinges on the willingness to ask difficult questions. What if the earliest monuments represent the continuation of a tradition older than the Younger Dryas? What if the knowledge preserved in stone reflects a worldview inherited from ancestors whose settlements lie beneath vanished coastlines? And what if humanity's first intellectual revolution occurred not with the rise of cities, but with the survivors of climate catastrophe who refused to let their understanding of the cosmos disappear? These questions form the foundation for the next stage of investigation, and they lead directly into the unresolved challenge. If the stones preserve memory, what do they remember? And how do we decode it before time erases the final clues? With each new discovery, the possibility that prehistoric builders inherited knowledge from a forgotten tradition becomes harder to dismiss. The evidence no longer fits the model of isolated groups experimenting independently. Instead, it suggests continuity, ideas carried across generations, landscapes, and vast spans of time. The monuments may be the last visible fragments of a worldview that once united distant communities under the same cosmic framework. As these patterns become clearer, researchers find themselves confronting a profound question. Are we looking at the remnants of a forgotten civilization? This question does not imply an empire or a centralized state, but rather a cultural horizon, an intellectual tradition shared by groups living in a world shaped by climate upheaval. After the Younger Dryas, populations scattered into new territories, taking their knowledge with them. Some settled in fertile valleys, others in highlands or near ancient lakes. Wherever they went, they rebuilt elements of their past. Solstice markers, lunar alignments, geometric enclosures, and ceremonial spaces tied to the sky. These were not random choices. They reflected a deep memory of how the world once functioned and how humans had related to it. If these traditions originated from earlier coastal societies now submerged by rising seas, the inland monuments would be the surviving threads of a larger fabric. This would explain both their sophistication and their sudden appearance. Rather than inventing cosmic architecture from scratch, the builders were preserving it under new conditions. They may have adapted older principles to fit different landscapes, but the underlying ideas remain surprisingly consistent. The global pattern supports this view. From Anatolia to the Sahara, from the British Isles to Northern Europe, early structures share similar goals: tracking time, marking cycles, and anchoring communities to predictable points in the heavens. Their variations suggest adaptation, not independent invention. When people migrated, they carried a common intellectual toolkit, methods for observing celestial cycles, dividing space, and commemorating events tied to nature's rhythms. These methods may have acted as cultural anchors during times of instability. The decline of these traditions further adds to the mystery. As millennia passed, the knowledge faded. Later monuments often show simpler designs, reduced precision, or symbolic remnants rather than fully functional observatories. This suggests the original purpose was slowly lost as communities changed. What began as a deeply coherent system eventually fragmented into regional practices with only faint traces of the initial complexity. Such decline aligns with the theory that the builders were inheriting a tradition rather than inventing it. As the memory weakened, so did the architecture. Another indicator is the absence of transitional forms. In most technological evolutions, early phases display primitive attempts followed by gradual refinement. But the oldest megalithic sites are among the most advanced. This upside-down progression is difficult to explain unless the builders already possessed significant experience. If they were descendants of groups who mastered these traditions elsewhere, perhaps on vanished coastlines, the inland sites would simply be the surviving expressions of that inherited knowledge. The symbolic continuity strengthens the case. Spirals, circles within circles, and repeated animal motifs appear across great distances. These symbols may represent celestial cycles, constellations, or seasonal rhythms. Even if interpretations differ, their recurrence suggests shared meaning. Symbolic systems rarely arise independently in identical forms. They spread through cultural contact or shared origin. Their presence across continents hints at a network of ideas passed down from a common source. The alignment precision also remains difficult to reconcile with conventional views of early human capability. Achieving near-perfect solstice orientation requires stability, teaching, and long-term commitment. It demands more than survival instincts. It requires generational knowledge. This precision appears in multiple regions separated by thousands of kilometers, suggesting that the underlying methods were not only known but maintained across vast distances. While no direct records survive, the stones themselves act as silent testimony. They preserve angles, ratios, and architectural logic that reveal a deep understanding of natural cycles. They represent a worldview in which the sky, land, and human experience were inseparable. Such a worldview does not emerge from isolated tribes. It emerges from a tradition strong enough to survive disruption. For modern researchers, the challenge is determining how much of this tradition can be reconstructed. The monuments hint at a lost chapter in human history, one obscured by rising seas, climate shifts, and the erosion of memory. Whether this chapter describes a single widespread culture or multiple interconnected groups is still uncertain, but its existence seems increasingly likely. If this forgotten tradition truly shaped the earliest stone circles, then the implications are profound. It would mean that humanity's intellectual roots stretch far deeper into prehistory than currently believed. And it would mean that the story we tell about our origins is missing a crucial beginning, one written not in clay tablets or papyri, but in stone markers aligned with the heavens. If the stone circles truly represent the last echoes of an earlier knowledge system, then their existence forces us to confront a difficult question. How much of human history has been overwritten by time? For centuries, scholars assumed that civilization emerged only after agriculture, but the earliest megaliths contradict this view. They reveal careful planning, advanced observation, and cultural continuity long before farming or cities appeared. These structures point to the possibility that humans were organizing themselves around complex ideas far earlier than conventional timelines allow. One of the strongest hints lies in the uniformity of astronomical understanding. Even though the earliest builders lived in small, scattered communities, many shared the same fascination with solstices, lunar cycles, and the movement of stars. This coherence suggests that early humans saw the heavens as a guide, not only spiritually, but practically. Alignments were not random. They were structured, measured, and passed down. Such stability across regions implies a worldview inherited from an older cultural foundation, not something invented independently. This raises the possibility that knowledge was once concentrated in regions now lost to the sea. As coastlines retreated at the end of the Ice Age, entire landscapes disappeared. If humans built permanent settlements along these ancient shores, their knowledge centers would lie underwater today, unreachable without deep-sea exploration. Inland stone circles may have been attempts to preserve fragments of that lost world. They may have served as memory anchors, a way to keep the cycles of the sky alive even as the land itself transformed. The rapid spread of similar ideas across continents strengthens this idea. In the span of just a few thousand years, a network of solstice and lunar-aligned structures appeared from the Levant to northern Europe and from the Sahara to the Atlantic coasts. This pattern does not resemble slow, incremental cultural diffusion. It looks like the dispersal of a shared legacy carried by migrating groups. These groups may have been survivors of a collapsed tradition, rebuilding what they remembered in new territories. Their monuments were not beginnings, but continuations. Modern archaeology still struggles to explain why the earliest monuments are often the most precise. If societies were learning these techniques gradually, the oldest structures should be the roughest. Instead, early sites show exceptional attention to angle, proportion, and orientation. Later sites sometimes imitate the form, but not the function. This suggests that the builders of the oldest monuments were drawing from a deep cultural memory, while later communities inherited only fragments of the original knowledge. Symbolic evidence reinforces this view. Repeated motifs, circles, spirals, animal figures, appear not only as decorations but as elements of a shared symbolic language. These symbols often align with celestial patterns or seasonal cycles. Their persistence across vast distances hints at a long-standing symbolic tradition, possibly tied to rituals that preserved key information across generations. If so, the symbols are not merely artistic, they are part of a memory system preserved in stone. This memory system may have helped early humans navigate cycles far larger than a single lifetime. Solstices occur annually, but lunar standstill cycles span nearly 2 decades. Some stellar alignments shift over hundreds of years. Tracking these cycles requires observation across generations. Without writing, the only way to preserve such knowledge was through architecture, structures that encoded celestial patterns in physical form. If the stone circles served this purpose, they represent a remarkable solution to the challenge of preserving information in a pre-literate world. Another unexplained element is the emotional and cultural weight these monuments carried. Later societies often treated them with reverence, even when they no longer understood their original purpose. This reverence suggests memory, faint but powerful, of a time when the stones were more than ceremonial objects. They were anchors of identity, symbols of survival, perhaps even reminders of a lost homeland or a vanished climate. Such emotional continuity is difficult to quantify scientifically, but it appears repeatedly in archaeological traces and mythological references. These ideas lead to a profound conclusion. The earliest stone circles may not mark the beginning of human civilization, but the end of a much older chapter. A chapter in which humans learned to read the sky, measure time, and preserve knowledge in ways far more sophisticated than once imagined. If this chapter existed, it would reframe the origins of science, culture, and human intelligence. For now, the story remains incomplete. But the stones provide enough clues to suggest that early humans did not simply stumble into complexity. They inherited it. And if they inherited it, then there must have been a time, long before recorded history, when this knowledge thrived more fully than the surviving remnants suggest. Understanding that earlier period requires one final step: examining what these structures might have meant to the people who built them, and what message, if any, they hoped to send forward through thousands of years of change. As the investigation reaches its final layers, one question becomes unavoidable. What message were the builders of these ancient monuments trying to leave behind? Their structures endure far beyond their own lifetimes, outlasting climates, cultures, and continents. They built in stone for a reason. They aligned their monuments to the sky for a reason, and they repeated the same patterns again and again, even across vast distances. Whatever their purpose, they wanted it to survive. One possibility is that the circles served as anchors of memory, physical reminders of cycles that shaped their world. In a time when climate shifts were sudden and devastating, when coastlines drowned and migrations became unavoidable, the stability of the sky may have been the only constant. Preserving knowledge of celestial cycles could have been a matter of survival. By encoding this knowledge in durable stone, they ensured that future generations would still understand the patterns, even if their own stories faded. But another possibility reaches deeper. These structures may have conveyed more than practical information. They may have expressed a worldview, that humans were part of a larger cosmic rhythm, and that understanding the heavens was essential to understanding life on Earth. In this sense, the monuments acted as philosophical statements, architecture meant to teach, inspire, and remind. Their builders may have believed that the sky carried lessons about order, renewal, and the cycles of time. This interpretation gains strength from recurring motifs across continents. Spirals evoke movement. Circles represent cycles. Animal figures point to seasonal migrations or star patterns. These symbols form a coherent visual language, suggesting that the builders were not simply marking astronomical events, They were expressing a worldview built on harmony between earth and sky. Such symbolism appears too consistent to be coincidence. It seems rooted in a long-standing cultural foundation. The placement of the monuments reinforces this idea. Many stand on natural high points where the horizon dominates the view. Others sit near ancient water sources, places of renewal and life. Some align with mountain peaks, creating visual lines that connect earth to sky. These choices imply that the builders selected sites for symbolic meaning, not convenience. The monuments were meant to be experienced, not just observed. Sunrise light entering a chamber, shadows stretching across carved floors, moonlit stones glowing during standstill nights. Another striking feature is the intentional durability of these structures. Stone circles were built to last for millennia. Their shapes resist erosion. Their alignments persist even as landscapes shift. This durability suggests foresight, perhaps even the expectation that future generations would rediscover their purpose. By building monuments that outlived them, early humans ensured that fragments of their worldview would survive long beyond the lifespan of their communities. This raises an intriguing possibility. The circles may have served as messages for the future. In a world shaped by instability and loss, the builders may have wanted to preserve the knowledge that had helped their ancestors survive. They may have hoped that future societies, facing their own challenges, would learn from the patterns encoded in stone. If this was their intention, the monuments act as time capsules, carrying wisdom across ages without relying on writing or spoken language. The global similarities support the idea of a shared message. Despite regional differences, the core concepts remain the same. Track the sky, mark the seasons, remember the cycles, honor the past. Such consistency implies that the builders valued continuity. They understood that knowledge could be lost, especially during times of upheaval. The monuments served as safeguards against that loss. Yet for all their durability, these structures are vulnerable today. Erosion, development, and neglect threaten many sites. If the stones were meant to speak to the future, then the future must be willing to listen. Modern technology helps decode the patterns, but technology alone cannot interpret the worldview behind them. That requires imagination, open-mindedness, and a willingness to question the accepted narrative of human origins. In approaching these monuments as messages, not just artifacts, researchers begin to see a deeper meaning. The builders may have wanted to remind the future that humanity has lived through cycles of change before. They may have sought to preserve knowledge that once helped them navigate environmental chaos. Or they may simply have wanted to celebrate the universe that shaped them, a universe whose patterns still govern our world today. Whatever their intent, the stones remain. They stand as witnesses to a forgotten chapter of human history, waiting for us to understand what their builders hoped we would remember. If the ancient builders hoped their monuments would carry meaning across the ages, then the final question becomes, what meaning did they intend for us to find? After thousands of years, after layers of soil and silence, after the disappearance of the cultures that built them, the stones still stand, unchanged in their alignment, unwavering in their purpose. They have outlived languages, empires, and borders. Their presence alone is a message, but one that requires patience to decode. Perhaps the simplest interpretation is that the builders wanted future generations to understand the cyclical nature of the world. Their alignments to solstices and lunar standstills may be reminders that time is not linear, but rhythmic. Each rising sun, each returning shadow, each repeating phase of the moon reflects a pattern older than humanity itself. By anchoring these cycles in stone, the builders ensured that even if cultural memory faded, the cosmos would continue to teach. Another interpretation is that they sought to preserve knowledge of a forgotten past, a time when humans lived through dramatic climate shifts and were forced to adapt to a changing planet. The precision of their constructions suggests urgency, as though they were passing down the lessons that helped them endure. The monuments may be silent teachers about resilience, memory, and the importance of understanding one's environment deeply enough to survive its transformations. There is also the possibility that the circles were meant to unify, not divide. In a world scattered by geography, the sky served as a shared language. Any community, anywhere on Earth, could look up and see the same celestial events. By aligning their monuments to these universal markers, early humans might have been reinforcing a sense of connection across distances. Their architecture expressed a truth. Different lands, same sky. Different people, same cycle. In that sense, the circles embody an ancient message of unity rooted in natural law. The durability of the monuments suggests that the builders intended their message to last far beyond their own lifetimes. Stone is not practical for short-term use, but ideal for communication across centuries. Their decision to build with massive blocks reflects a long perspective, an understanding that knowledge must persist even when societies collapse or disperse. These monuments may have been part of an unbroken chain of transmission, passing wisdom through countless generations until the tradition finally weakened. For modern researchers, the challenge is recognizing which parts of that knowledge still remain. The stones preserve alignments and ratios, but the meanings attached to them must be inferred. As scientific tools reveal more hidden features, buried chambers, extended sightlines, ancient pathways, a clearer picture emerges. Yet the deeper this picture becomes, the more it suggests that humanity has forgotten something profound, something once obvious to our ancestors. This realization transforms the stones from archaeological sites into mirrors. They reflect not only the world of the past, but the world we inhabit today. We face environmental shifts, rising seas, and uncertain futures, conditions not unlike those that confronted the builders thousands of years ago. Their monuments may remind us that survival requires awareness, coordination, and memory, that understanding the earth and sky is not a luxury, but a necessity. The final mystery, then, is not about what the builders knew, but why they tried so hard to preserve it. Was it a warning, a celebration, a map, or a message to descendants they would never meet? Each possibility leads to new questions, and each question deepens the enigma. But perhaps that is the point. The stones were not meant to provide answers, but to provoke curiosity, to encourage each generation to look up at the sky, observe its patterns, and rediscover truths about the world through their own experience. If so, their builders achieved their goal. Thousands of years later, we are still asking, still searching, still trying to understand the meaning carved into silent stone. What remains certain is that the monuments are far more than relics. They are testimonies to human ingenuity, resilience, and memory. They are conversations across time. They challenge us to reconsider where our knowledge truly began and what may still lie hidden beneath the soil, waiting to be found. And so the story of the stone circles does not end with the past. It continues in the present, carried forward by those who look at these ancient structures and see not ruins, but messages, still standing, still aligned, still waiting for us to listen.